Welcome back to the CTO Playbook, the podcast dedicated to helping CTOs excel. What if the real obstacle in getting certified wasn't the regulation at all, but the way we think about regulation? Most CTOs see compliance as a checklist, binary, fixed, predictable. But what happens when the checklist keeps changing? When the rules bend, evolve, or hinge on people you've never met? In today's episode, I'll share a story from a coaching client who discovered that the path through regulation isn't paved with perfection, it's shaped by influence. And once you understand that, everything changes. I'm your host, Adam Horner, coach to CTOs from startups to enterprises and everything in between, helping you lead with clarity, confidence, and strategic impact. If you feel like you're figuring it out the hard way, you're not alone. That's why I created the CTO Playbook, a podcast and platform built for tech leaders just like you. Explore coaching, cohorts, and how you can stay up to date at thectoplaybook.com, helping you build your own playbook for your path at your pace. Now let's get into this week's playbook. I want to take you into a moment many CTOs have felt, but few talk about openly. It starts on a Tuesday leadership meeting. A CTO, let's just call him the client, sits down expecting a normal update. They spent months preparing for certification decision, documents are polished, processes are written, teams are exhausted but proud. And the regulators have been promising progress. And there's real optimism in the air. He's already visualized the relief, the celebrations, the sense of finally the hard work is paying off. And then the news comes in. Not approved. Not rejected, just delayed. Again, a vague update, a shrug of collective shoulders, and a new date offered, likely as if it carried no weight at all. Another month or two, maybe. The CTO feels the air whoosh out of his body. Not because of the delay, but because of the normality of it, the way it's presented as just another logistical shift. The leadership team moves on to another topic, but he cannot. Because he's the one who has to carry the consequences. He's the one who has to face the team, the roadmap, the customers, the reality of another 3 months of limbo. And in that moment, he feels something rising. Frustration, yes, but also something deeper, a sense of powerlessness. He looks at the leadership team and thinks, I'm doing everything right. We're compliant. We've hit every requirement you gave us. So why does nothing seem to move? And this is the moment that becomes the heart of our story. You see, as CTOs, we are wired for clarity, for infrastructure that behaves, for code that compiles or doesn't, for tests that pass or fail, for systems that work or don't work. Compliance should fit that worldview. You submit documents, you prove your controls, you meet the requirements, you tick the boxes. Binary. Except the reality of regulation, certification, and external compliance is not binary at all. It's a negotiation. It's a prioritization exercise. It's a political landscape, a system shaped by humans, not checklists. And for this CTO, that realization had not yet come into land. All he saw was a surface. We are compliant, so why isn't this moving? But beneath the surface, there was that truth lurking. Compliance isn't a checklist, it's a process. And a process shaped by people must be influenced through people. This is one of the hardest leadership lessons for technical founders and CTOs, that being right is not enough to make progress. Over the following days, he oscillated between anger and confusion. Anger that the rules seemed inconsistent, confusion over why the timeline felt arbitrary to him, frustration at being told that the delays were, well, just normal. The feeling that the leadership team did not share his urgency. But out of that frustration came a spark. The spark that begins every meaningful leadership transformation. He asked the question that changed it all. If compliance is not the problem, then what is? And so began the shift. From compliance as a binary standard to compliance as a human system. From powerless participant to informed influencer. Frustration to agency. So let's pause here and just offer a question that we can take into our week. What assumption are you currently holding about your compliance or certification that might be blinding you to alternative paths of influence? See, most CTOs assume the rules are fixed, but most regulators assume the process is flexible. That gap is where progress is lost and where leadership begins. Now, when the CTO and I spoke again a few weeks later, he was still carrying that frustration, but something in his tone had shifted. It wasn't just anger anymore, there was curiosity, a willingness to step out of the binary frame of view. We are compliant, so why aren't we approved? And into something more complex, more ambiguous, more nuanced, and ultimately more powerful. The shift began with this idea. Compliance isn't the same thing as progress. He didn't really fully believe it yet, honestly, but he was beginning to see the cracks in the old mental model. Now, I explained what I've seen again and again across industries, whether it's information security, financial regulation, public sector accreditation, or enterprise procurement processes. Regulators and auditors aren't running a binary system. They're running basically a prioritization engine. See, their world is shaped by competing applications, limited staffing, political pressures, risk profiles, external events, internal capacity is a big one, human interpretations, and most importantly, incentives that rarely align squarely with your timeline. A CTO sees a checklist, a regulator sees a landscape, and progress is determined not merely by correctness, but by clarity, fit, relationships, timing, and for them, the perceived risk of saying yes. This CTO was beginning to see it. In one of our calls, he recounted a moment when his leadership team presented yet another regulatory update, another shift, another delay, another round of, well, we're working on it. Now, in the past, he would have swallowed the frustration and quietly drowned in it. But this time, he did something a little bit different. He asked harder questions, not aggressive, but definitely incisive. What has actually changed in their requirements? Whose priorities are shaping this timeline? What information are we not seeing? What assumptions are we taking as fixed that might not be? And then, who has influence here? And who do we need to build a relationship with? None of these were technical questions, leadership questions. And suddenly, the room shifted. Not dramatically, but enough. People leaned in. The COO paused. The CEO looked up, and someone said, actually, that's a fair point. And for the first time, he felt the ground move. Not because compliance had changed, he had. The real breakthrough came when he realized something that every experienced executive eventually discovers. Every regulatory process is shaped by people. People with goals, pressures, preferences, incentives, biases, and constraints. People who respond to the same things we all do. Clarity, respect, responsiveness, relationship, proactivity, certainty, and crucially, familiarity. And that's why two companies with the same compliance posture can receive radically different timelines. It's not corruption. It's not unfairness. It's human systems behaving like human systems. And this is where his thinking was evolving. You can't influence a checklist, but you can influence people. And if compliance is both, and it is, then the lever of progress is influence, not perfection. So, what did we do? We sat down together and we created an influence map, tool that I've used with other CTOs. Who are the regulators involved? Who are the reviewers? Who are the administrators and the auditors? Who are the advisors behind the scenes? Who signs off on the final decisions? And who in the internal organization are the leaders shaping how our company shows up? Who are the external parties that they listen to? Who's credible? Who's visible? And who is missing information? And then the key question, the golden leadership question. What is each person's incentive to help us move faster or to slow us down? Now, when he completed the map, one thing became really obvious. There were dozens of conversations that had never happened. Dozens of relationships never been built. Loads of misconceptions that were never clarified. And a whole load of opportunities to reduce friction. He had been waiting passively for progress, but progress had been waiting passively for him. In a later call, he said something that was quite memorable, to be honest. He said, I realized the problem wasn't that the regulators were slowing us down. The problem was that I wasn't speeding us up. Not through shortcuts, not through pressure, but through leadership, influence, clarity, strategic presence, asking better questions, through understanding the human system, not just a checklist. There was a moment he articulated it in his own words. The core insight of this entire episode, compliance isn't just a checklist, it's a process. And a process shaped by people must be influenced through people. His words. That realization changed everything for him. So let's take a moment. Pause the episode if you need to and just ask yourself these questions. If you treated your next certification or audit as a human system rather than a technical one, what's the first conversation you'd initiate? Not a document, not a process, a conversation. Who would you reach out to? Who do you need to understand better? And who do you need to build rapport with? Influence starts with understanding. And understanding starts with talking. Now, up to this point, we've been inside a story shaped by frustration, the delays, the lack of clarity, the sense of powerlessness that so often surrounds certification processes. But I want to offer you now the opposite experience. And this comes from my own career, a story that stands in perfect contrast. Because while compliance can feel like an endless marathon run in the dark, it can also be one of the most structured, fluid, supportive processes, certainly that I've ever taken part in. And understanding why this second story worked is the key to unlocking progress in the first. So before coaching, I was leading one of the most complex information security implementations of my career in the UK across multiple partners involving government-level stakeholders and enterprise-grade certification. The stakes were high, and the requirements, I'll be honest, they were intense. And the margins for error, close to zero. And yet, and this is the part that I still find remarkable, it was one of the smoothest and most fulfilling compliance processes I've ever taken part in. On time, under budget, way exceeding the expectations. It left every stakeholder, from auditors to end users, really thrilled with the outcome. And it begs the question, why did this compliance journey feel like artistry, while the other, earlier one that we were speaking about, felt like paralysis and frustration? Let's break it down. Was it because the requirements were simpler? No, nowhere near. Was it because the documentation was any clearer? Not particularly. Was it because we were somehow more compliant than everyone else? No. Everybody in the program was competent. The difference, the entire difference, came down to the people. Specifically, one, we had partners with deep knowledge and they'd lived the experience. They weren't consultants who had read the standard. They were people who had spent careers inside the standards. They didn't interpret the rules. They understood them. They didn't fear the auditors either. They anticipated them. They talked to them. They didn't obsess over ticking boxes. They obsessed over the spirit of the requirements, what the outcomes were meant to achieve. Two, the relationships were being built before the process even began. Our partners knew the auditors, not socially, professionally. Through years of working the same cycles, the same frameworks, the same standards, they knew what mattered, what didn't, what could be adapted, what must be followed to the letter, and where the common mistakes were. They also understood how the auditors thought and how to communicate in a way that created trust rather than tension. And I'm not talking about politics. This is just professional familiarity. And familiarity in regulatory systems is rocket fuel. Three, shared incentives. Every partner, auditor, and internal stakeholder had the same objective. Get this done, get it done right, and get it done with integrity. No hidden agendas, no rivalries, no foot dragging, no opaque timelines. Now, contrast that with many modern compliance landscapes where the incentives diverge rapidly. There's a CTO wanting clarity. We all want that. The regulator wants risk reduction. The leadership team wants speed. The compliance team wants certainty. Finance wants predictability. And product wants minimal disruption. The regulator's internal team wants, well, sometimes just a bit of peace and quiet. See, when the incentives misalign, the timelines are going to get stretched all over the place. However, when the incentives do line up, everything can accelerate, and it often does. So number 4, communication that was clear, direct, and honestly, it was human. Every meeting felt like a conversation between adults, not supplicants and authorities. Every question had a purpose, every answer had a rationale, every concern was aired early, all the risks were surfaced without hesitation, without fear. No surprises, no drama, no theatre. It felt like working with a well-practiced sports team, where everyone is pulling in the same direction, understands the variables, and trusts one another's intent. Now, during that UK project, I saw something that stayed with me. When compliance is treated as a human system, progress becomes predictable. When compliance is treated as a checklist, though, progress becomes fragile. And I saw that on sister projects in the same organization. So let me repeat that just to make it super clear. Compliance isn't just a checklist. It's a process shaped by people. And as CTO, we must own the whole process, not just the tick boxes. So this second story proves that the positive version of that insight. And the first story shows what happens when the insight is missing. So I remember most vividly came at the end of this process during the training sessions with the end users. We were demonstrating systems capability that had once been literally impossible to deliver. Processes that had been broken with workarounds on it, like that for years. Workflows that had required manual intervention, long lead times, and compromises. And now, seamless, auditable, compliant, elegant. Watching the end users run that system with the ease and confidence of people who finally had tools fit for purpose, it was genuinely joyful. And it reminded me of something fairly essential. See, compliance, when done well, doesn't constrain capability, it unlocks it. It's a catalyst for maturity, for clarity, reliability, and trust. And CTOs, we're uniquely positioned to turn that catalyst into momentum. Now, one of those compliance journeys was chaotic, delayed, emotionally charged, and emotionally draining. And the other was smooth, collaborative, even inspiring. The difference wasn't the checklist. It wasn't the standard. It wasn't the requirements. It was the people, the relationships, and the influence. Compliance is both a checklist and a process, a human system. And your power as CTO increases dramatically when you decide to own the process, not just the paperwork. This is the moment where, as CTOs, we stop feeling powerless and start realizing, actually, I can influence more than I thought. And that's the transformation that I want for you as a listener. So here's another question for you to take into your week. If you mapped out the people shaping your next audit or certification, not the tasks, the people, who would be on that map? And what relationships do you need to start building now rather than leaving them until it's too late? Because checklists don't change the timelines. People do. Now, we've walked through two stories today, one fueled by frustration, the other fueled by alignment. And between them sits the real lessons. You're never as powerless as you think. Not in regulation, not in certification, not in compliance, not in leadership. Not on my watch. Because these systems are not made of documents, they're made of people. And when you understand people, when you build people relationships, ask sharper questions, take responsibility for the whole process, you move from waiting to leading, from reacting to shaping. And this is where we bring all of that together into something practical and immediately actionable. So here's my playbook for you today. 5 steps to navigate any compliance or certification process. Now, this is the part that CTOs I work with tell me they re-listen to when they need clarity. The structure they return to when tight timelines, external dependencies, and shifting requirements are really threatening to pull them under. They're not theoretical. These are lived. They've carried several CTOs and senior leaders through regulatory environments in fintech, health tech, gov tech, and procurement. So let's walk through them. And to be clear, these aren't sequential. You need to do all of these pretty much simultaneously. So number 1, understand the expectations, the constraints, and the budget. So before you write a single line of documentation, before you assemble your project team, before you architect controls, gain absolute clarity on what the regulator actually wants, what the scope really is, how the decisions will be made, what the constraints are, the acceptable timelines, and the real risk appetite. And importantly, what good will look like to them, not just to you. Most of us as CTOs make 2 mistakes at this stage. We assume that the requirements are clear, and we assume that internal alignment exists. Both assumptions are dangerous. Our job is to remove that ambiguity, to surface the hidden expectations, and to challenge the vague statements, to define in writing what the organization is truly aiming for. This step alone can save you months. So understand the expectations, the constraints, and the budget. 2, you've got to do the hard work on the essentials. Make the tick boxes real. Right? There's a universal truth in compliance. You cannot influence your way out of weak fundamentals. So once the expectations are clear, the next step is unglamorous, but crucial. Document what must be documented. Implement what must be implemented, fix what needs to be fixed, and close the obvious gaps. Because you need to build the controls that matter, and you need to test the processes that count. Compliance has a core, a skeleton, a set of non-negotiable items. And your influence is only going to work when those bones are solid. And the better your execution, the more credibility you build with internal stakeholders and external reviewers alike. So number 2, do the hard work on the essentials. Number 3, understand the people, their incentives, and how to influence them. This is the step most of us as tech leaders overlook, and the step that could change everything for you. Create an influence map. Who are the decision makers? Who are the reviewers? Who are the advisors in the background? Who are the internal leaders shaping your posture? Who interprets the rules and how? What pressures are they under? What does low risk mean to them? What outcome is in their best interest? And then ask the leadership question that unlocks your influence. What does this person need in order to help us succeed? Sometimes it's clarity. Sometimes it's reassurance. Sometimes it's fewer surprises. Sometimes it's conversation that should have happened months ago. Compliance is a human ecosystem. You don't control it, you navigate it. And navigation requires understanding currents, not just maps. So 3, understand the people and how to influence them. 4, timeline. Be crystal clear on the timeline. Every compliance process has a hidden truth. Deadlines are where reputations are made or broken. Regulators remember who makes their job easier, and they remember who didn't. So as a CTO, we need to know every date. We need to track every dependency. We need to predict the bottlenecks. We need to communicate timelines relentlessly. Where there's risks, surface them early, prevent surprises. Keep the organization aligned on reality, not on wishful thinking. There are few excuses tolerated in this world. If your deadline slips because you didn't spot a dependency, that's on the leadership. Our job is to bring predictability to something that often feels unpredictable. And the irony? We have more control over timelines than we think once you understand the system. So 4, be crystal clear on your timelines. 5, and this is one of the harder ones, know what's mandatory, what's optional, and which rules can be bent. This is where the amateurs and the professionals part ways, right? A CTO who treats every requirement as equally important will drown in the work. A CTO who knows which levers move and which do not, that's someone who can accelerate a process by weeks or months. Good research, strong relationships, and experienced partners will help you uncover the requirements that must be followed exactly, the interpretations that are a lot more flexible, and the areas where the regulator cares more about outcome rather than the implementation. Because the items that don't matter, but everyone assumes they do, make sure that they're much lower on your priority list. And the rare requirements where bending the rule is acceptable if an intent is met. This step can save more time than any engineering optimization you'll ever implement. Because in compliance, clarity is speed. So there's your 5 steps. 1, understand the expectations, the constraints, and the budget. 2, do the hard work on the essentials. 3, understand the people and how to influence them. 4, crystal clarity on that timeline. And 5, know what's mandatory and which rules can be bent. So before we close, I want to highlight something subtle but powerful. The CTO I coached didn't become more influential because the regulators changed. He became more influential because he changed. He began asking sharper questions, challenging the assumptions and understanding the incentives. He was building relationships and owning the entire process, not waiting for clarity, creating it, not demanding progress, enabling it. And that's the real transformation. It's not a certification, it's not a risk assessment, not the license, but it's that identity shift from reactive technologist to strategic leader. So before we finish, let me leave you with one final question. The most important one, perhaps. Where in your regulatory or compliance journey have you been waiting for permission when you could have been building influence? Because you're not powerless. You're not at the mercy of the system. You're not just the CTO in a world of external decision makers. You have far more agency than you think. And I hope that today's episode was proof of that. If this episode has resonated with you, if you've recognized yourself in any part of this story, know that you can influence more than you thought, much more, and your organization needs that version of you. Thank you for listening to the CTO Playbook. I'm Adam Horner, and if you'd like support in building your own playbook for clarity, influence, and impact, you'll find coaching, cohorts, and more at thectoplaybook.com. Until next time. Thank you for listening to the whole episode. I appreciate your time. So just before you go, I'd like to ask you for a favor in return for putting together this episode of the CTO Playbook for you. Please share the episode with just one person who will appreciate it. Wherever you're listening, whether that is Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or another platform, Sharing the episode will help more CTOs find the podcast and enable me to create more great content. Remember that you can find more information on the CTOplaybook.com. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode of the CTO Playbook.